It's certainly something that our readers will understand, that the fact that the creative process doesn't start with the consumer, and I think that's what they're interested in, because there's a certain sense among consumers now, I think it's fair to say, that if the creative process starts with the consumer aged X to X and driving this car and living this lifestyle, there's something slightly artificial. Whereas real, genuine, individual art can only come out of an organic, creative process. So it's certainly going to be of interest to our readers.
That's very true. But that's not to say that in the mass market it's bad or it's good. It's not
Absolutely.
to judge it. It's just to say that it's just a different approach.
Different.
In the mass market, there's some fantastic scents, and there are some pretty bad ones. But everybody's free to pick and choose. So it's not really a problem. It's just just a different way of doing things.
I think it's very interesting that the mass market now are very keen to try to create art perfumery themselves and have lots of different projects that they're working on.
True.
And it's interesting to see the way that they're going about it, but I think that's a whole other interview.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting, but it's almost, in a way, I see it as almost fake. Because actually, when you pick up an independent perfumer's bottle and the whole filter and the smell, it might look the same, or the bottle might look the same, but you pick up the product and you smell it, it's different. There's no question about that. And you just, it's like anything. It's like good wine, good whiskey, good cheese, good. There's something that you cannot deny. It's like if you buy. I mean, living in France, obviously, I eat a lot of cheese. It's not. I have to admit it, but I do.
How do you keep your figure? I eat a lot of cheese.
Well, I don't keep my figure. That's the problem. I really don't keep my figure. But yeah, that's another
Yes,
debate.
Exactly.
But there is a real difference between. Having said that, there is a real difference between good and bad. I mean, good and bad.
I understand.
Between products.
For me personally, as a consumer, I find that if I smell a fragrance by yourself, by Mona Diorio, by Andy Tower, it's as clear as a Picasso signature. I can tell who is behind that fragrance. There's a very clear, distinct signature in it. Whereas if a group of people have been involved in creating a fragrance, of course there can't be that same signature weaving all of the fragrances together. And I think that's a key difference that certainly our readers are very much appreciative of, and it's something that they're interested in. That's why they're more and more interested in the provenance of fragrances.
It's great to hear that, because yeah, it's very interesting for me to hear you say that, because obviously when you're making things or creating things, you can't really you lose that objectivity, and you can't really see you can't really have that. You're so far in it that you can't really see it, and you can't stand back. So I have no idea. I really have no idea. People say that, and it's fantastic to hear that, but I can't see that. I can see it, when I smell Andy Tower's fragrances, or but I can't see it for myself. But
It's there.
because I tend to be very, my perfumes tend to be, or are for the time being, quite discreet. And I think perfumery, for me, everybody has their own definition of perfumery or perfume. But I think it's, as we live, there's nothing worse than going to in a cinema on a lift, or if somebody has a scent that's too strong, it can almost make you feel queasy. So I tend to have things, make perfumes which are quite discreet and really quite personal. So only those wearing them or those close to them can smell them. But the trouble is I'd love to do, I could do hundreds and hundreds of perfumes, and now I'm sort of yeah. It's not because it's light and fresh, but I could almost do something really, really heavy and almost overpowering. But maybe one day I will. But for the time being, they tend to be very discreet and fresh.
Yeah, that awful word
yeah.
that we're almost outlawing. Interesting that you should talk about the future. Finally, perhaps you could tell us a bit about the future of James Heeley, where you see yourself going from here, and what your next projects are.
Well, that's a big question. I think it's just to try to keep going, and that would be great, just to keep going. And then the next thing is I'm obviously looking at different. I always have about 3 or 4 scents on the go at any one time, and some of them sort of like get fed up with or say that I just can't get there. Some of them go a step further. And so now I've got 3 or 4 on the go. Maybe one will see the light of day, and then maybe some of them you forget and you go back to. So nothing's lost. And at the moment I'm working on, like everybody, there's a kind of tendency. But I did one perfume. This was almost 4 years ago, which is Cardinal, which is based on incense, and it's something I'd like to. I'm going back to, if you like, not going back to, but it's always been around. But I'm mixing, I'm working with rose, patchouli, oud, a lot of like resins, and so that's a nice approach. But I don't want it to get too heavy and too thick and too like pompous. Pompous is the wrong word, but I don't know. So that's I think that's where I'm going next, or that's where I've been going for a long time. But I don't want to. The thing is, I don't want to get lumped with this kind of signature sense. I'd like to try and weave my way through the olfactive world, which is just a huge, long journey. So,
well, long may you walk it. Thank you very much, James
Thank you.
Heeley.